We started building a tool in-house for this whole kind of process, for the experimentation, basically prompt engineering, evaluating these. And I saw that we're not going to be the last company that has this. There will be hundreds of thousands of companies that will need such kind of platforms.
What was really the trigger point for you personally to sort of make that shift from just working in that space to sort of saying, okay, now is the time where probably now it's going to really accelerate?
Actually, I wanted to jump into the startup world even before joining the startup I worked on previously. So after leaving academia, my goal was to go into the startup world. But the chance was actually, it made even more sense, right? To join first a startup coming from academia to learn basically a little bit about more business and then moving into building my own startup.
The Cloud Frontier podcast is brought to you by Simplyblock. In this bi-weekly podcast, we explore cloud infrastructure startups, founder journeys, and discuss cutting-edge cloud technologies. Join us as we uncover the latest innovations shaping the future of cloud computing.
Hello everyone, welcome to yet another episode of Cloud Frontier podcast. Today we have founder of Agenta.ai, Mahmoud Mabrouk, and I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly on the podcast. Welcome, Mahmoud.
Well, thank you for having me, Rob.
Thanks for coming. It's really a pleasure. I mean, we had a chance to obviously get to know each other. We share an investor, one of the incubators, right, called Antler, and obviously we had a lot of chats around it. But I think it'd be a great idea for you to introduce yourself to the audience, introduce Agenta, and tell us a little bit more about yourself and your origin story. How did you really come to do what you're doing?
So yeah, about myself, so I'm Mahmoud. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Agenta. And now what Agenta does, basically we are an LLM developer platform. Think of it Postman for large language model powered applications. So LLM powered applications are things like chatbots, agents, or AI workflow that, do some classification task. Now, building these AI applications right now is quite difficult because LLMs are unreliable. So teams are spending lots of time trying to make, for example, the chatbots reliable. And this is where we came or where we come. Basically, we're building an end-to-end platform that streamlines this whole process. So our technology help our users basically in the evaluation of these LLM applications, both before putting them to production so that they make sure they are reliable, and after putting them to production to see, for example, whether the chatbot is hallucinating and fixing kind of these issues.
We'll definitely spend lots of time with product. I think what everyone always likes to know is like, how did you come up with that idea? Like, what's your background? How did you meet your co-founder, etc. I think those things are always exciting.
So basically how this came, actually, I was working. So my background in academia, I was doing machine learning, and then I went into startups, and I was working in my last job in a startup, and we're building AI products. And that was in 2020, 2021, before the foundational models. So basically we are doing it the old ways. We were training models from scratch, labeling a lot of data, and then the foundational model came. And the thing that we're spending, I think at that point, around 6 months working on, I think the first prototype or POC we did the foundation with the foundation model had already almost the same accuracy. So we saw that basically that's the future for building AI products. However, when we wanted to make it reliable, we had issues. So we started building a tool in-house, basically for this whole kind of process, for the experimentation, basically prompt engineering, evaluating these. And I saw that probably we're not going to be the last company that has this. There will be hundreds of thousands of companies that will need such kind of platforms. So I left and jumped with a friend of mine. He's a platform engineer, basically built previously developer platforms with an enterprise. And we started Agenta. So we started building an open source platform for building reliable LLM applications. And the rest is history.
That's a cool story for sure. And so one could say you've been in AI for a while, or like you've been in a LLM space for a while. Like how long has that been, and how did you maybe also originally end up in that space? What were you always curious about that? Like, did you sort of see the future early on? What was the trigger to?
Well, I'd say I was in ML, right? LLM maybe a little bit less, but in ML I was in a while. So I studied computer science with a focus on ML. And I would say like my experience right now in machine learning is around 15 years. I did PhD in the space. And in the beginning, it was like ML with SVM, so original. I mean, when I was studying in my master's, I think that was in 2012, that was the beginning of the use of neural networks. So when we learned them at university, there were more toy kind of examples. People were using SVMs. And then came the neural networks. That was exciting. So I did a PhD, I used the neural networks. And within that came the generative AI. So basically, generative adversarial networks. And these were used to generate images, right? Before now, Stable
Right.
Diffusion. And I think that was the point where I saw, I mean, already like at that point, we were generating images that are very pixel like, and then very quickly came StyleGAN and it was now realistic. And I saw that in the future, like this whole creativity problem will be solved by kind of AI. And that's
Right.
what I believe right now. It's like not only images, videos, text, books, everything is going to be generated by LLMs. So yeah, then I focused more on generative AI and LLMs, and it brought me to here.
Right, and I'm very curious, like why did you decide to jump on your own startup sort of now, or like let's say a year or two ago, right? Like, what was really the trigger point for you personally to sort of make that shift from just working in that space to sort of saying, okay, now is the time where probably it's going to really accelerate? Was it like also post Chat GPT? Was it around the time? Like, I think that'd be quite nice to learn about.
Actually, I wanted to jump into the startup world even before joining the startup I worked on previously. So after leaving academia, my goal was to go into the startup worlds. But the chance was actually it made even more sense, right? To join first a startup, coming from academia to learn basically a little bit about more business, and then moving into building my own startup. But I think the point where I made the decision that it's now actually was in 2021, I think, like the day almost where ChatGPT, or in the week where ChatGPT came
Right.
out. So basically, there, ChatGPT came out, and I wanted to. I saw it was very exciting, right? And I built an open source kind of tool that allows you to use it from the console, right, for developers. It was called ChatGPT Wrapper. So I built it like I don't know in a weekend, and launched it on Twitter, and then it grew like to 3,000 stars, like very rapidly. And I saw
Oh,
for the first time like how does it mean? What does it mean that you have a market pull? That you're building something that is, to be honest, shitty, right? But then you have like all these people starting doing PRs, asking you for features, and the whole thing, like it's almost like you plant a stem and then there is a tree that comes out of it. And
right.
that was honestly very exciting for me. So I decided, okay, this is the moment to leave and to do something. And two, I want to do it with open source, right?
Wow, that. I mean, that's a really perfect story, I would say. So now obviously that also explains why you're doing it open source. So in some way, it was just a natural transition from the little weekend project into like a full blown startup.
So it was not the same project, right? I mean, that project actually
Yeah,
there was a
yeah,
maintainer within the community that took it over. Now it's called LWE, so LLM Workflow Engine. So if you're a
and it's
developer,
still alive.
and yeah, it's still alive, and I think it's very robust right now. Very cool. So
Oh,
he
wow.
really did a great job there. But yeah, it was I think the natural progression.
And so maybe so why didn't you continue that project then? Like, what was it? Just not sort of something that you could see making a business out of, or like why did you sort of change to another idea in that way?
Yeah, I mean, the idea was already there from some time. As I mentioned, we were working internally within the startup, and I really saw like there is a need there. I think the other project is not something that was more of a developer tool, nothing, not very monetizable. You cannot create a VC kind of startup based on
Hmm.
it. It's a very cool project, but yeah, I think if you're gonna do a startup, there are two options, right? There is like this whole organic ways where you're doing something, it succeeds, and then you see, okay, this that can be much better.
Hmm.
And there is the other way where it's more planning, where you look at the market, you look at the needs, you try to predict to some degree the future, and you build something around it. which is
Okay.
what we did.
And I understand. So I understand. Then you left your previous organization and you joined Antler, right? So you already had the co-founder before joining Antler, right? And for the audience, so Antler is the incubator program where you can essentially join with or without a co-founder. And after a couple weeks of program, you ideate, you validate that problem or an idea, and you pitch the sort of ready business idea to them, to Antler, to the incubator, and they might choose to invest in you or not, of course. But that's like, let's say, quite a high chance if you do a good job and have a strong team, right? And I understand you joined it with your co-founder, so maybe it could be interesting because obviously also Simplyblock originated and from Antler, and we've spoken about it quite a lot. But it'd be obviously interesting to hear your story and have your story be shared to the audience of how that went for you, and what happened sort of afterwards after you obviously got the funding from Antler.
Yeah, I mean, so basically, I had experience with such programs. So, like as I mentioned, in a couple, 2 or 3 years ago, I also was interested in starting a startup, and I joined a program called Entrepreneur First. So quite similar, and I saw the value there for first-time founders, especially with everything that is related to fundraising, right? Obviously, so there's always the question whether you want to bootstrap or you want to VC fund it. Startup for us, it was clear, right? It's a very large market, extremely competitive. So we wanted to be VC funded. And we were both first-time founders, right? And both technical founders. So getting funding, especially in Europe, is, at least I would say, not simple. So there, like the whole, I would say, having the mentorship of Antler, and obviously the funding and opening all the doors, getting some kind of validation from this European VC network was very important for us. So it was, I think, no brainer. Plus, it was a market where it was extremely fast moving, and we wanted to like very quickly start going. So it wasn't the kind of project where it's like this kind of niche idea that nobody has heard of, that you can take the time. It's like, let's plan for 6 months, 1 year, and then the perfect moment when everything is perfect,
Right.
we launch. It was the first day we joined Antler. Basically, we pitched the idea. They saw the potential, and we started coding and we started building.
Oh, wow, that's amazing. So it's really like a gold rush. So you knew there's a gold rush, and you just need to be fast, right?
Yeah.
Above all, to really get there. And you joined with your co-founder. You didn't really look for anyone else in the program. You really just took it as a sort of real acceleration, right? So you sort of have quite high likelihood of getting the check from them. So we just really focused on building, got the check, and then sort of continue from there, right?
Yeah. So yeah, basically, so I joined with Akram. I think he joined like 1 week later. So at that moment, I was basically. Yeah, I was convincing him, and basically he joined us. He joined me, and we started working on this. We got the check, I think, in around July. Basically, that opened, I think, a lot of doors. So it's a small check that Antler gives, like compared to VC. It's obviously an incubator, so it's 100K. But 100K compared to zero is an extreme amount, I would say,
Right.
and it opens a lot of doors. So that was, I think, where the project moved or went from something that you're doing into the basement to a real business. And then we started. Basically, we launched, I think, in around August, like the first prototype open source, almost a POC. Then we launched the cloud hosted version in November, December, and also we started the whole story of fundraising, which is, I
Wow.
guess, a long
Right.
story.
Right. I mean, definitely, we would love to hear about that. So maybe just tell us more. How did the actual larger fundraising went for you?
Yeah, I mean, fundraising was actually a two-time thing. So we as soon as we left Antler, we started actually fundraising. We didn't have anything at that point, right? But on the other hand, there was a hype, especially at the beginning, and we had a lot of inbound from VCs. So it was a no-brainer. We didn't even have the choice, right? It felt so
Right.
when you get like bombarded by VCs wanting to take calls, and then we started fundraising. that didn't go like where we wanted to go. So I think I talked to around 50 VCs or so, but it did not go anywhere. And we had some challenges. Basically, we were first-time founders, we were technical founders, which is, at least in Europe, less exciting or less interesting than
Right.
business
Right.
co-founders. So
I
it's
can
a
say
little
that.
bit more difficult. And there was always the question of like uncertainty. So the VCs still did not. They were excited and they were afraid of missing something because clearly there is something there. But on the other hand, they didn't have yet the certainty and the belief in the whole area and the product. They didn't understand what's the differentiation, what's the difference between. I mean, the kind of question we got, like made it really clear that they had no clue. So it was more almost like they're trying to discover. So we stopped. Like I think we did 4 weeks of fundraising. It was very good at the end of the day. It was a good training for me, right? First time fundraising. So then we worked on the product. We got traction. We validated our ideas, our hypotheses, and then we went again in January, and that went, I would say, quite fast. So we were very quickly able to, and we didn't announce it yet, to be honest. but we were.
I mean, you have a chance now, so you have a chance now if you'd like to.
So, but yeah, but I think it went like from the first couple of calls, we found our investors, and yeah, and they believed in us and the idea and the traction, the potential that it had. So but I think the second time was actually quite fruitful and much less painful.
Wow, but you know, I really love to pause here for a moment because it's really a similar experience that like we had at Simplyblock. So we first like went out to the market because we saw all those VCs coming and everyone being excited, right? But then we realized we are not ready. We don't know what we want, right? Like there's a lot of things that we haven't figured out. We haven't done proper check of who we want to raise from. We then haven't done check of like what's feasible, what not, what sort of traction is the right sort of tractions. I think it's a bit similar, and I've also had obviously a lot of founders asking me, like how should you fundraise, how should you do it, and I always say, like first prepare and then go out. But then then on the other hand, I see all those repetitive patterns where like a lot of founders actually do go out and learn it firsthand that like it does need preparation, right, and then go out again. I mean, what is your thought on it? Like, what would be your advice now to the founder who says, I'm in that sort of first time founder seat and I want to fundraise, and obviously VCs are knocking on my door. Like, what should I do about it? Like, should you actually just have a couple chats, maybe with like second or third tier VCs, see how it goes, go back, or just really reject it, prepare, go out? Like, what would be your strategy here now?
Yeah, I mean, I have honestly a lot of thoughts about the topic since I spent a lot of my time on the topic. So the first thing, I mean, the realization that VCs and especially like let's say low rank or junior VCs, it's their job to talk to you. Right? It's really their job. So that's what they do the whole day. They're basically BDR or SDRs for VCs. So that's what they do. And if there is a little bit of potential that you're like a serious kind of startup to fund, they would like to talk to you as soon as possible so that they will be the first one to discover it. So that's their job. It's very, very important to understand this, and a lot of discussion for them, even if they are senior, is just for discovery because that is their job. So that's the first thing I realized. The second, I think, is to look at fundraising in a very similar way to sales, and to try to filter who's your ICP. So that, I think, was a very like this mind shift also made the whole process difficult, because when you're doing fundraising, you get a lot of rejections. This is how it goes, like similar to sales to some degree, right? There are a lot of people, and by understanding that actually who is your ICP, even if you take calls, right, with people that are outside of your ICP, because at the end of the day, you want to maximize, and there is kind of a number game in it. But you need to realize who's actually is likely and who's totally unlikely to fund you. So if we find people, for example, if you're talking to a VC that they're, I don't know, that usually invest in Series A and post-market fit, even if they want to talk to you, it's extremely unlikely that they will fund you. They just want to get an early feeling of who you are, so that when the time comes, if the time comes, they fund you. So then you go into these conversations with the mindset that this is a long-term game, but it's unlikely. So there is no rejection per se. It's just getting to know each other. And there are the others where, I don't know, they never invest in developer toolings. They had never invested in anything technical. And they only invest in, I don't know, startups working in the DACH region, like really for these kind of markets. Same thing. You might go into this call, but just put it as, let's see what happens, and focus really your energy on like these VCs where you see the potential. They had invested in developer tools. They are the technical expertise for us. They invest in our deal size.
Absolutely, yes.
They are okay with the kind of uncertainty, because also something I discovered, a lot of VCs, especially in Europe, at least that's what I know, are not in the market of taking risks. So they work more like private equity, I have a feeling. And also seeing this and understanding this, I think with this mindset, at least you come and you're psychologically and also preparedness, it's important. And then there's the process. But for the process, I think you'll find a lot of resources on how to have some kind of streamlined process.
Of course.
Maybe there's a last thing I didn't say. It's like all of this is good, but then you might have a plan, but what was the saying? That's everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face.
Right.
So at the end of the day, for us at least, we had this very good plan and pitches and everything, but then something happened, everything went out of order.
Right. Yeah. I think you really nailed those sort of learnings. I mean, to be honest, I would really second all of that. My sort of observations after raising for Simplyblock are really, really consistent with yours. And I think I would just add one little thing that yes, despite you might even already mentally talk to some investors and know that they're not your ICP. They're not going to invest in you because they never invested in as I said, developer tools. They invest too much, too large ticket, too small. But the moment you get rejection, even from those guys, it does affect you mentally. At least in my case, any rejection affects you. So I think I would also just have some founders be really careful about like talking to too many investors, because the more investors you talk to, the more rejections you're gonna get, period, right? No matter what you're building, no matter who you are. And it's just not the nicest thing to just keep getting rejections, right? So I think overall I really, really believe that what you said is on point. And yeah, I mean, preparation matters a lot, right?
Yeah, that's for sure.
All right. That was good on fundraising, and now let's go back to the product. So you're in AI space. Obviously, it's crazy hot, right? I think I have like two questions regarding that. The first is, since you've started the project, the company, like what has happened in AI? Can you summarize it from your perspective? Like what do you see is happening now versus what happened? What's been happening like 1-2 years ago, like from when you launched the very first GPT wrapper, like what has happened? Like how do you see that space evolving?
That's a very difficult question. So I'm gonna give at least some thoughts that came.
But just from your perspective, of course, I'm not asking you to like describe the whole market, but like really, what do you see from this front row, let's say?
Yeah, I mean, at least some thoughts. I honestly think nobody can say that they can predict the future or truly have like an understanding. Even maybe Sam Altman, he just like trying to predict the future.
Right.
But at least the first thing I see is some kind of LLMs becoming a commodity to some degree, right? With the open source, especially with the Llama, right? When it started, there was also from the investors we talked to and a lot of people, a feeling that OpenAI had already won by being the first. But we've seen right now in the last 1-2 years that actually it's a race, almost like, I don't know, the CPU race in the 90s, where I remember there was AMD and Intel, and it's like each month the gigahertz were more and more, right? And same thing, memory, and it feels with the LLMs it's quite similar and even maybe more democratized due of it not being a hardware kind of, although very costly or capital intensive thing. So that's one thing, which is nice for us, right? Because we allow users to kind of exchange and compare these models. So that's the first thing we saw. The second is a little bit maybe on the point of fine tuning. So in the beginning, there was a large belief that a lot of building these kind of AI application would be based on fine tuning these models. And although that's still to some degree true for some cases, it turns out that with prompt engineering and with creating kind of workflows around these LLMs, like providing them with the right context, with retrieval augmented generation, knowledge bases, and having like architectures like chains of prompt and so on, you can actually achieve a lot. So there's a lot that it's becoming more something that I would say an AI engineer would do and not an ML engineer. And the difference here is the AI engineer is this more kind of generalist that does everything from prompt engineering to microservices, and the ML engineer is really that person who trains the neural network. So that's I would say the second thing, the power of kind of prompt engineering with the kind of tools. And now where it's going, I mean, our name might tell you something, Agenta. So I believe it's going towards kind of agents and more autonomous agents that can do more and more powerful things. My belief is that already with the current large language model, with the current technology that we have right now, already like the possibilities, like what is being built right now is much less than what the kind of technology is capable of. And we're seeing this right now as you follow Twitter. You see like right now people are building like agents and infrastructure and, for example, developer kind of agents and so on and so forth that would have worked with, I don't know, models that are 6 months old. But it's like just because it needs some time of learning of the best practices on how to build these. So yeah, that's these are at least 3 points I see.
Well, that's quite deep actually that you went there. So I mean, one clearly can tell that you're really close to that space, and you know, in the context of Agenta. So do you know what people are using your platform for? Like, do you see some real cool stuff being built on your platform? I'll be really curious to know, like, what is the coolest thing that people do using Agenta?
There's a lot of kind of use cases you'll find around the space. So starting from actually one of the simplest one, but very useful one, is everything that is around classification entity extraction. So there, the cool thing that happens is that, let's say previously, like 4 years ago, you wanted to create a classifier for your customer emails. Right? You have like a lot of emails and now you want to send it to customer service. Does it go to tech? Does it go to business? Does it go to... basically, the way to do it was to label a lot of data and then train neural networks. To do this, have ML engineer. It may be a project that would cost you 6 months and a lot of money, hundreds of cases. And now you can do this, like the first prototype. I mean, I can show you a demo and we can do it right now on this call. It's that fast. Obviously, the reliability in the beginning would require work, and that's where Agenta comes in. But what happens is that there's a lot of things that were already feasible, like 2 years ago. That's the first thing that you can do with Gen AI, that were already feasible. But they were so costly that automating it didn't make sense, because from a business perspective, I'm not going to spend 200K on something that does not bring that much, or at least maybe bring it on 5 years horizon. But now the cost of this became much, much lower. So there is much more need from the market, or people are building these things. So that's the first thing you see. A lot of traditional machine learning use cases, basically where now they're being built with LLMs because it's much cheaper and much faster. And then you have like the new kind of use cases, which are around AI assistants. So although I say the future is agents, agents is take, I think, at this current stage, and from what we're seeing, only a very small portion of at least what our market, like kind of middle and enterprise, right? At that stage, look for. So there may be more conservative. You might see startups working with agents, but there usually the focus after this is kind of QA application, so RAG, a chatbot that answers questions that helps, an AI assistant, maybe that have access to some kind of action. So, for example, an AI assistant for a project manager. This is one of the examples we have. So basically, you have something in your linear or Jira, some kind of AI assistant, a chatbot that you ask about the status of some kind of basically projects or so on and so forth.
And is it mostly individual developers building on Agenta, or enterprises, SMEs, mix? Like, what do you see out there, or what is
Yeah,
your ambition as well?
yeah, I mean, that's actually, it's not even our ambition, it's our differentiation, I think, from, because our market, as I mentioned, is extremely competitive. And our belief is that LLM powered applications, a bit different from usual software, are being built by a mixture of developers and domain experts. Simply because LLMs can be programmed with natural language. To write a prompt, you don't need to be a developer. And to a large part, we have a lot of use cases that require the experience of the domain expert. If you're building something, for example, for the medical space, for example, we had an AI assistant for psychotherapist. You need psychotherapists to assess it, to help with the prompt engineering. Similarly, for the legal, for the financial space. So basically, what we build with Agenta is a platform for these kind of two kind of persona that they can collaborate with it. So it's really more targeted to larger companies that have cross-functional teams, with developers obviously being like the core persona that starts the projects and owns the project, but with the domain experts collaborating through the UI, both in prompt engineering and in evaluation.
Oh, that sounds really cool. And actually, my first thought, and please tell me if I'm just being stupid, but like, what if I'm just like individual developer, like a growth sort of like indie hacker, right? And I want to build something in medical space, as you said, but I'm not part of big institution, and then I want to maybe like connect with a doctor, right, or with an expert in a medical field. Like, is there a possibility to like build that kind of marketplace into your platform over time, like, or am I just being crazy?
Actually, I mean, marketplaces, especially for labeling, I think it's a very smart idea. Like I saw it, I know that exists for other fields. For example, labeling. When you're doing any machine learning kind of project, you need labeler. Let's say you're doing an X-ray kind of classifier, right? It's a bit different space. You need people to label. So you need some kind of way where you find these people. And there are, like, I would say, very, very large startups, like scale-ups right now, for example, like Scale AI, I think, that basically provide these kind of services in an almost market space way. So I'd say yes, that might be a very good business case for us. I mean, personally, I'm always afraid of market spaces. I had friends who tried startups with market spaces. It's one of the hardest thing, I think, after B2C, because you get like you need to solve both problem, right?
Supply and demand. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. No, I mean, just a random thought, but I mean, it's good to know that like that's also something possible, right? Like whether you're going to build it or not, you might always just integrate another service. And I think there's just maybe for like people out there who want to build something cool, but just don't have resources to. I mean, yeah, it's possible, I guess, these days. And one thing we definitely have to touch on is open source, right? So you seem to be very deep into open source community. You started, some other projects in open source. Agenta is open source. How do you think about it? How do you think about making a viable business out of it being an open source product, right? I think that's always a question that probably pops.
Yeah, totally. So I think open source, at least in the beginning of your startup journey, is makes life much easier, right? Especially for the markets where open source makes sense, right? Obviously, if you're making software for the medical industry, open source won't be that much helpful, other than for gaining some kind of maybe trust from enterprise because they can see your code. But even then, maybe you should provide a license that is source available and not open source. So, but when you're working with the developer community, I think open source becomes a very good, at least, criteria for some of the people to buy. So a lot of developers, when they're looking for a tool, they know what they're looking for. The first place they look for is GitHub, even if they want to buy the tool later. Just the ability, having the trust that even if the startup dies, I can still use. the kind of the platform or the tool,
Right.
because I have access to the code, the ability to see what's inside, so make sure that it's secure. And I think it's also a developer thing where we, as developer, and at least in my own age, I used Linux and all like the open source tools. You feel like a bit of connection. If it's a little bit philosophical. So it makes life easier on that hand. It makes life easier that you do not need to spend on sales, invest lots in sales in the beginning, because everything almost we get as inbound leads through the open source project. You get also the advantage of getting feedback from enterprise customers, from like large entities and not only hobbyists. Even if your product at very early stages is maybe not that reliable, just because open source, they try it, they self-host it, and you get like into this feedback loop very quickly without having to spend any resources into that. The challenge, as you mentioned, is okay, you need to have some kind of very clear strategy to monetize it. Now, for us, we basically worked on the angle of collaboration. So, honestly, we took the same strategy from PostHoc, also an open source kind of startup, quite successful. We use them, we love them, and their strategy was more of like having the kind of hobbyist, the open source as a hobbyist kind of solution that is more targeted to single developers, small teams, maybe startups, while keeping like the cloud hosted or the enterprise self-hosted versions as more the professional version. And we went with this direction. So the way we at least we're managing it right now is we're trying to have everything that is more into collaboration, or obviously enterprise features such as role-based access control, all within the cloud and kind of self-hosted enterprise version, while keeping the open source version have all the core capabilities. So it's a community version that are more targeted towards single developers or very small teams.
Right. So you're developing both versions. So you already have sort of two versions and you maintain them, and you already at this stage have quite differentiation there.
Yeah. So we really.
Okay. Yeah, that's great. That makes a lot of sense. All right, I think we have to wrap up soon. So I have those two typical closing questions, and the first one is, what are the most valuable resources that help you shape your view of what the cloud infra space is gonna be like, in the future? And I guess in your case is really from the AI perspective. And this could be people, books, blogs, podcasts, tweets, right? So who's the person you're following, or what sort of resources is worth reading or looking into that will help people to look at the space the same way you do?
So maybe it's a little bit biased because it's not only about the cloud, but Heavybit VC. So like a great resource library for developer tooling and kind of companies that talks about the product, the market, how to build your teams for especially developer tooling companies that I really, really like. So it has been very, very valuable.
That's a good one. We'll put it in the short notes. And the last question would be like, what is the most exciting thing that you see happening in the cloud infra space right now? And obviously, you can also be biased for this one.
Yeah, I mean, there. One thing I'm excited about. I won't say I'm an expert in, but like I'm really excited about these Cloudflare workers, especially with Python. So I think the idea of having like everything running within V8, like with WebAssembly, with kind of no latency or additional cold start, at least not latency, cold start for the latency. I think that's very exciting. The whole like kind of WebAssembly, I'm trying to explore it. So whenever I find time, I try to understand the space and like the technology there built by the workers. I think is kind of cool.
That's a good one. We'll also put some notes on that in the show notes. All right, Mahmoud, thank you very much for being our guest on the Cloud Frontier podcast. It was really great chat.
Thank you for having me.
Great to have you. And is there anything else you would like people, the audience, to know about you or about Agenta or about anything else?
Well, I mean, if you're building, if you're building an LLM powered applications, a chatbot or anything, so check out, I would say, Agenta.ai, and please be in contact. Would love to help.
Perfect. Thank you very much, and until the next one.
Thank you for listening. We hope you enjoyed our discussion. Cloud Frontier is brought to you by Simplyblock, an intelligent database storage orchestrator. Get more IAPS and lower latency for your databases in the cloud. Visit our website at simplyblock.io for more information.